After suggesting that you might have criminal exposure, President Trump makes his most explicit ask of the call. Let's play a part of that conversation.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Mr. Secretary, was the president here asking you for exactly what he wanted? One more vote than his opponent.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find. We had continued to look. We investigated, like I just shared the numbers with you. There were no votes to find. That was an accurate count that had been certified. And as our general counsel said, there was no shredding of ballots.
Mr. Secretary, after making this request, the president then goes back to the danger of having you deny these allegations of fraud. Let's listen to that part of the clip.
And I watched you this morning, and you said, well, there was no criminality, but I mean, all of this stuff is very dangerous stuff. When you talk about no criminality, I think it's very dangerous for you to say that.
Secretary Raffensperger, you wrote about this in your book, and you said, quote, "I felt then and still believe today that this was a threat. Others obviously thought so too, because some of Trump's more radical followers have responded as if it was their duty to carry out this threat. Please tell us what you, your wife, even your daughter-in-law experienced regarding threats from Trump's more radical followers."
Well, after the election, my email, my cell phone was doxxed, and so I was getting texts all over the country, and then eventually my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting. You have to understand that Trish and I, we met in high school, and we've been married over 40 years now, and so they started going after her, I think, just to probably put pressure on me. Why don't you just quit, walk away? And so that happened, and then some people broke into my daughter-in-law's home, and my son has passed, and she's a widow and has 2 kids. And so we're very concerned about her safety also.
And Mr. Secretary, why didn't you just quit and walk away?
Because I knew that we had followed the law and we had followed the Constitution. And I think sometimes moments require you to stand up and just take the shots when you're doing your job. And that's all we did. You know, we just followed the law and we followed the Constitution. And at the end of the day, President Trump came up short. But I had to be faithful to the Constitution. And that's what I swore an oath to do.
During the remainder of the call, the former president continued to press you to find the remaining votes that would ensure his victory in Georgia. Let's listen to a little more.
Why wouldn't you want to find the right answer, Brad, instead of keep saying that the numbers are right? So look, can you get together tomorrow? And Brad, we just want the truth. It's simple. And everyone's going to look very good if the truth comes out. It's okay. It takes a little while, but let the truth come out. And the real truth is I won by 400,000 votes, at least. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
4 days after the president's call to Secretary Raffensperger was January 6th. The president whipped up the crowd in front of the ellipse, once again promoting the allegation that Secretary Raffensperger, the president's own attorney general, had told him was false. Here he is on the ellipse.
In Fulton County, Republican poll watchers were ejected, in some cases physically, from the room under the false pretense of a pipe burst. Water main burst, everybody leave, which we now know was a total lie. Then election officials pulled boxes, Democrats, and suitcases of ballots out from under a table. You all saw it on television, totally fraudulent, and illegally scanned them for nearly 2 hours, totally unsupervised. Tens of thousands of votes. This act coincided with a mysterious vote dump of up to 100,000 votes for Joe Biden, almost none for Trump. Oh, that sounds fair. That was at 1:34 a.m.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Sterling, I want to thank you for your service to the state of Georgia and to the country. Speaker Bowers, likewise, I want to thank you for your service to the state of Arizona and to the country. You have served not only your home states, but our nation and our democracy. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. I thank the witnesses for joining us today. You are now dismissed.
The three Republican election officials have been dismissed from their testimony. Now we're going to hear from a witness named Wandrea Arche Moss, nicknamed Shay Moss. She and her mother were accused falsely of election fraud in Georgia, and their family was besieged with threats and all sorts of horrors unleashed upon them in this campaign of lies.
And I mean, she's really just one of many that were singled out by Trump and his allies in videos, in tweets, by name on some of these phone calls. And the allegations against them were completely invented and made up. And they were subjected to really horrible threats, but also racist threats. That were directed at them because they were black, they were working in Fulton County, and the accusation was a blanket accusation
I now
that there
welcome
was.
our final witness
Let's listen in.
this afternoon. Wandrea Shay Moss. Ms. Moss worked in the Department of Registration and Elections in Fulton County, Georgia, from 2017 until 2022. In that job, Ms. Moss handled voter applications and absentee ballot requests and also helped to process the vote count for several elections. In December 2020, Ms. Moss and her mother, Ms. Ruby Freeman, became the target of nasty lies spread by President Trump and his allies as they sought to overturn the election results in Georgia. Ms. Moss and her mother, Ms. Freeman, are two of the unsung heroes in this country, doing the hard work of keeping our democracy functioning for every American. Ms. Moss, welcome. Thank you for your service, and I thank you for being here today. I will now swear you in. Please stand. Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. Ms. Moss, thank you very much for being here today. I understand that you are here along with your mother today. Would you like to introduce your mama? Hi, Mom. Ms. Moss, today we'll be asking you about some of the threats that you received following the 2020 election. Since you've been an election worker for over 10 years, I want to ask you, in your decade of service, had you ever experienced threats like these before? Don't be nervous. I understand. So, and I want to make sure that the record reflects that you've done it for quite a while and you never received a threat, and your answer was no. Thank you. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of the House Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for questions.
Good afternoon, Ms. Moss. Thank you for being here. I understand that you were employed by the Fulton County Registration and Elections Department for more than 10 years, and I understand that you loved that job. Please tell us what made you so fond of the work that you did.
Well, I've always been told by my grandmother how important it is to vote, and how people before me, a lot of people, older people in my family, did not have that right. So what I loved most about my job were the older voters. Younger people could usually do everything from their phone or go online, but the older voters like to call, they like to talk to you, they like to get my card, they like to know that every election I'm here. And like even college students, a lot of parents trust in me to make sure their child does not have to drive home. They'll get an absentee ballot, they can vote, and I really found pleasure in that. I liked being the one that, you know, if someone can't navigate my voter page, or, you know, they want a new precinct card and they don't have a copy machine or a computer or all of that, I could put it in the mail for them. I was excited always about sending out all the absentee ballots for the elderly and disabled people. I even remember driving to an hospital to give someone her absentee application. That's what I love the most.
So you really enjoyed helping people vote and participate, and that was something, the right to vote that your grandmother taught you was precious.
Yes.
Well, I know the events that we're here to talk about today are incredibly difficult to relive. Your proud service as an election worker took a dramatic turn on the day that Rudy Giuliani publicized a video of you and your mother counting ballots on election night. President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and others claimed on the basis of this video that you and your mother were somehow involved in a plot to kick out observers, bring suitcases of false ballots for Biden into the arena, and then run them through the machines multiple times. None of that was true, was it?
None of it.
I'd like to show you some of the statements that Rudy Giuliani made in a second hearing before the Georgia state legislators, a week after that video clip from State Farm Arena was first circulated by Mr. Giuliani and President Trump. I want to advise viewers that these statements are completely false and also deeply disturbing.
Tape earlier in the day of Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Moss and one other gentleman quite obviously surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine. I mean, it's obvious to anyone who's a criminal investigator or prosecutor, they are engaged in surreptitious illegal activity again that day. And that's a week ago, and they're still walking around Georgia lying. They should have been questioned already. Their places of work, their homes should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports, for evidence of voter fraud.
That video was from Rudy Giuliani's appearance at a Georgia State Senate hearing on December 10. How did you first become aware that Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, was accusing you and your mother of a crime?
I was at work, like always, and the former chief, Mr. Jones, asked me to come to his office. And when I went to his office, the former director, Mr. Barron, was in there, and they showed me a video on their computer. It was just like a very short clip of us working at State Farm, and it had someone on the video like talking over the video, just saying that we were doing things that we weren't supposed to do, just lying throughout the video. And that's when I first found out about it.
And were there social media posts that they showed you responding to those false claims?
Well, when I saw the video, of course, the first thing that I said was like, why? Why are they doing this? What's going on? And they, just told me that Trump and his allies were not satisfied with the outcome of the election, and they were getting a lot of threats and being harassed online, and asked me, have I been receiving anything, and I need to check on my mom. And I told them, I was like, where have they, where have you been getting these threats? I don't believe I have any. And Mr. Jones told me, like, they're attacking his Facebook, and I don't really use Facebook. I have one, so I went to the Facebook app, and I'm just kind of panicky at this point because this has never happened to me, and my mom is involved, and I'm like her only child. So I'm just asking him, like, well, where are the messages? All I see is the feeds. Like, how do you get to the messages? And he said, it's another icon on your phone that says Messenger. And I went to that icon, and it was just a lot of horrible things there.
And those horrible things, did they include threats?
Yes, a lot of threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that, I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920.
Were a lot of these threats and vile comments racist in nature?
A lot of them were racist. A lot of them were just hateful. But yes, sir.
In one of the videos we just watched, Mr. Giuliani accused you and your mother of passing some sort of USB drive to each other. What was your mom actually handing you on that video?
A ginger mint.
It wasn't just Rudy Giuliani. We heard President Trump make these false allegations repeatedly during his call with Secretary Raffensperger. Let's listen to a portion of what he had to say about you and your mother.
We had at least 18,000, that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly, 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler.
Donald Trump attacked you and your mother using her name 18 times on that call. 18 times. Ms. Moss, can you describe what you experienced listening to former President Trump attack you and your mother in a call with the Georgia Secretary of State?
I felt horrible. I felt like it was all my fault. Like, if I would have never decided to be an elections worker, like, I could have done anything else, but that's what I decided to do. And now people are lying and spreading rumors and lies and attacking my mom. I'm her only child. Going to my grandmother's house. I'm her only grandchild. And my kid. It's just, I felt so bad. I just felt bad for my mom, and I felt horrible for picking this job and being the one that always wants to help and always there, and never missing out one election. I just felt like it was my fault for putting my family in this situation.
Well, it wasn't your fault. Your mother was kind enough to come speak with us earlier. Let's listen to her story in her words.
My name is Ruby Freeman. I've always believed that when God says that he'll make your name great, but this is not the way it was supposed to be. I could have never imagined the events that followed the presidential election 2020. For my entire professional life, I was Lady Ruby. My community in Georgia, where I was born and lived my whole life, knew me as Lady Ruby. I built my own business around that name, LaRuby's Unique Treasures, a pop-up shop catering to ladies with unique fashions. I wore a shirt that proudly proclaimed that I was, and I am, Lady Ruby. Actually, I had that shirt on. I had that shirt in every color. I wore that shirt on Election Day 2020. I haven't worn it since, and I'll never wear it again. Now I won't even introduce myself by my name anymore. I get nervous when I bump into someone I know in the grocery store who says my name. I'm worried about who's listening. I get nervous when I have to give my name for food orders. I'm always concerned of who's around me. I've lost my name, and I've lost my reputation. I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people, starting with number 45 and his ally, Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter, Shay, to push their own lies about how the presidential election was stolen.
Ms. Moss, how has this experience of being targeted by the former president and his allies affected your life?
It's turned my life upside down. I no longer give out my business card. I don't transfer calls. I don't want anyone knowing my name. I don't want to go anywhere with my mom because she might yell my name out over the grocery aisle or something. I don't go to the grocery store at all. I haven't been anywhere at all. I've gained about 60 pounds. I just don't do nothing anymore. I don't want to go anywhere. I second guess everything that I do. It's affecting my life in a major way, in every way. All because of lies. For me doing my job, same thing I've been doing forever.
Your mother also told the Select Committee about how she had to leave her own home for her safety and go into hiding after the FBI told her that it would not be safe for her there before January 6th and until the inauguration. Let's listen to a clip of her story in her own words.
Around the week of January 6th, the FBI informed me that I needed to leave my home for safety. And I left my home for safety around that time.
Understood. How long did you stay out? Did you, remain outside of your home for your own safety?
I stayed away from my home for approximately 2 months. It was horrible. I felt homeless. I felt, I can't believe this person has caused this much damage to me and my family. To have to leave my home, that I've lived there for 21 years. And, I'm having to have my neighbors watch out for me, and I have to go and stay with somebody. It was hard. It was horrible.
And that your conversation with the FBI about needing to leave your home for your own safety, or perhaps recommending it, do you remember, was there a specific threat that prompted that, or was it the accumulation of threats that you had received?
What prompted it was getting ready to, January 6th was about to come, and they did not want me to be at home because of all the threats and everything that I had gotten. They didn't want me to be there in fear of, the people were coming to my home, and I had a lot of that. so they didn't want me to be there. Just in case something happened, I asked, how long am I going to have to be at home? And they said, at least until the inauguration.
Ms. Moss, I understand that people once showed up at your grandmother's house. Tell us about that experience.
I received a call from my grandmother. This woman is my everything. I've never even heard her or seen her cry ever in my life. And she called me screaming at the top of her lungs, like, Shay, Shay, oh my God, Shay, just freaking me out, saying that there were people at her home and they, you know, they knocked on the door, and of course she opened it and seeing who was there, who it was, and they just started pushing their way through, claiming that they were coming in to make a citizen's arrest. They needed to find me and my mom. They knew we were there. And she was just screaming and didn't know what to do. And I wasn't there, so, you know, I just felt so helpless and so horrible for her. And she was just screaming. I told her to close the door. Don't open the door for anyone. And, you know, she's a 70-something, I won't say, year-old woman, and she doesn't like having restrictions. She wants to answer the door. She likes to get her steps in, walking around the neighborhood, and I had to tell her, like, you can't do that. You have to be safe. You know, she would tell me that at night, people would just continuously send pizzas over and over to her home, you know, and they were expecting her to pay for these large amounts of pizzas, and she went through a lot that she didn't have to. And once again, it made me just feel so horrible.
In addition to the personal impact this experience has had on you and your family, one of the things that I find most disturbing is how these lies discourage longtime election workers from continuing to do this important work. Tell us, if you would, of the other election workers shown in that State Farm Arena video and their supervisors. How many are still election workers in Fulton County?
There is no permanent election worker or supervisor in that video that's still there.
And did you end up leaving your position as well?
Yes, I left.
Ms. Moss, I want to thank you for coming in to speak with us and to thank you for your service to our democracy. What we have just played is a truly horrible and appalling sample, but just a sample of the things that were said about you and your mother following the election. I want to say how very sorry I think we all are for what you've gone through, and tragically, you're not alone. Other election workers around the country have also been the subject of lies and threats. No election worker should be subject to such heinous treatment just for doing their job. With your permission, I would like to give your mother the last word.
Yes.
We're just going to play the tape.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one. But he targeted me, Lady Ruby, a small business owner, a mother, a proud American citizen who stand up to help Fulton County run an election in the middle of the pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Moss. Thank you, Ms. Freeman, or as America now knows her, Lady Ruby, for your service to Fulton County, Georgia, our country, and our democracy. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Ms. Moss,
Yes, sir.
I want to thank you for sharing with us the very troubling story of what you and your mother experienced. The harassment of election workers like you simply for doing your duty as public servants poses a threat to our democratic process. Your testimony is an important contribution to the work of our committee and serves as a reminder to all of us that the safety of local election officials is vital to ensuring that our elections are always free and fair. I want to thank our witness for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witness, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witness. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for a closing statement.
For more than 200 years, our democracy has been distinguished by the peaceful transfer of power. When an American raises their right hand and takes the presidential oath of office, they are transformed from an ordinary citizen into the most powerful person in the world, the president. This is an awesome power to acquire. It is even more awesome when it is handed on peacefully. When George Washington relinquished the office of the presidency, it set a precedent that served as a beacon for other nations struggling against tyranny. When Ronald Reagan described it as a kind of miracle in the eyes of the world, he was exactly right. Other countries use violence to seize and hold power, but not in the United States, not in America. When Donald Trump used the power of the presidency to try to stay in office after losing the election to Joe Biden, he broke that sacred and centuries-old covenant. Whether his actions were criminal will ultimately be for others to decide. But what he did was, without a doubt, unconstitutional. It was unpatriotic, and it was fundamentally un-American. And when he used the power of his presidency to put the enormous pressure on state, local, and local elections officials and his own vice president, it became downright dangerous. On January 6th, that pressure became deadly. Ruby Freeman said the president is supposed to protect every American, not target them. And she is right. If the most powerful person in the world can bring the full weight of the presidency down on an ordinary citizen who is merely doing her job with a lie as big and heavy as a mountain, who among us is safe? None of us is. None of us. In city councils and town councils, on school boards and election boards, from the Congress to the courts, dedicated public servants are leaving their posts because of death threats to them and to their families. This is not who we are. It must not become who we are. Our democracy held because courageous people like those you heard from today put their oath to the Constitution above their loyalty to one man or to one party. The system held, but barely, and the question remains, will it hold again? If we are able to communicate anything during these hearings, I hope it is this. We have been blessed beyond measure to live in the world's greatest democracy. That is a legacy to be proud of and to cherish, but it is not one to be taken for granted. That we have lived in a democracy for more than 200 years does not mean we shall do so tomorrow. We must reject violence. We must embrace our Constitution with the reverence it deserves, take our oath of office and duties as citizens seriously, informed by the knowledge of right and wrong, and armed with no more than the power of our ideas and the truth, carry on this venerable experiment in self-governance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Lady Ruby and Shay, thank you for your courage. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for being here today. It means so much for everyone to hear your story, so thank you for that. We have had tremendous testimony today. We've been reminded that we're a nation of laws, and we've been reminded by you and by Speaker Bowers and Secretary of State Raffensperger, Mr. Sterling, that our institutions don't defend themselves. Individuals do that. And we've reminded that it takes public servants. It takes people who've made a commitment to our system to defend our system. We also have been reminded what it means to take an oath under God to the Constitution, what it means to defend the Constitution. And we were reminded by Speaker Bowers that our Constitution is indeed a divinely inspired document. And so it's been an honor to spend time with you and with our previous witnesses here today. To date, more than 30 witnesses called before this committee have not done what you've done, but have invoked their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. Roger Stone took the Fifth, General Michael Flynn took the Fifth, John Eastman took the Fifth. Others, like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, simply refused to comply with lawful subpoenas, and they have been indicted. Mark Meadows has hidden behind President Trump's claims of executive privilege and immunity from subpoenas. We're engaged now in litigation with Mr. Meadows. The American people in our hearings have heard from Bill Barr, Jeff Rosen, Richard Donahue, and many others who stood up and did what is right. And they will hear more of that testimony soon. But the American people have not yet heard from Mr. Trump's former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. Our committee is certain that Donald Trump does not want Mr. Cipollone to testify here. Indeed, our evidence shows that Mr. Cipollone and his office tried to do what was right. They tried to stop a number of President Trump's plans for January 6th. Today, and in our coming hearings, you will hear testimony from other Trump White House staff explaining what Mr. Cipollone said and did, including on January 6th. But we think the American people deserve to hear from Mr. Cipollone personally. He should appear before this committee, and we are working to secure his testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
People answer the call to public service in such different ways. Some run for office. Some volunteer to make sure their neighbors can get to their voting locations. Some work at polling sites to help election day go smoothly. Some look into problems to guarantee our elections are secure and accurate, just to name a few. As I mentioned at the start of this hearing, when we talk about our democratic institutions, we're talking about these individuals and many others who do these jobs across the country. They represent the backbone of our democracy at its most important moments, when the citizens cast their votes and when those votes are counted. We've heard the stories of their courage. They've earned the thanks of a grateful nation. But for Donald Trump, these witnesses and others like them were another roadblock to his attempt to cling to power. On Thursday, we'll hear about another part of that scheme, his attempt to corrupt the country's top law enforcement body, the Justice Department, to support his attempt to overturn the election. Just as we heard today that Donald Trump was deeply involved in a scheme to pressure state officials to overturn the election results, we will hear on Thursday that Donald Trump was also the driving force behind the effort to corrupt the Justice Department. Listen to this clip from the former acting Attorney General, Richard Donahue.
The president said, suppose I do this, suppose I replace him, Jeff Rosen, with him, Jeff Clark. What do you do? And I said, sir, I would resign immediately. There is no way I'm serving 1 minute under this guy, Jeff Clark.
You'll hear from Mr. Donahue in person on Thursday as my colleague, Mr. Kinzinger, presents details about this plan. The chair requests those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
An upsetting and distressing day of testimony today, hearing the personal stories of election officials and workers from Georgia and from Arizona whose lives were upended by Donald Trump, by his minions, by his mobs, and by his election lies. We heard details of Trump supporters descending upon their homes, leveling hideous accusations, making obscene threats against them. And here we see members of the committee approaching the last two individuals who we heard testify, election workers, Shaye Moss and her mother, of course, Lady Ruby. That's Congresswoman Elaine Luria and Congressman Adam Kinzinger embracing them. And Abby, it was how anybody could hear what happened to these two women and think that the lies were no big deal or were perfectly appropriate is beyond me.
It was, I think, today a picture of a campaign of lies and a campaign of terror that was carried out against a lot of people. And Lady Ruby and her daughter, Shaye Moss, were just two examples of how this played out. Threats and harassment, but the key thing here was that it came from the President of the United States. It was so powerful to hear Ruby Freeman talk about how she felt tearfully. She lost her name, she lost her reputation, she couldn't go anywhere. Her daughter says she gained 60 pounds, she doesn't want to work, she feels responsible for the threats that were leveled against her. They talked about Shaye Moss's grandmother, whose house was broken into by Trump's minions, frankly, who were looking for Shaye and Lady Ruby and trying to make a, quote, citizen's arrest. It's chilling. And it's just some of the examples. I mean, Rusty Bowers, we heard earlier today from Arizona, talking about his terminally ill daughter who would hear people outside of their home threatening them.
She died of a terminal illness that
shortly
month,
after.
January 2021. Yeah.
Brad Raffensperger's widowed daughter-in-law at home alone with her two children, with people outside of their home. This was a campaign of terror that came straight from the top.
And it really is. It's beyond comprehension. But I want to go back to Shaye and her mother, Lady Ruby, because it's not just plain old terror with the two of them. It was racist terror. Right. The kind of language that people, including the former president, were using about her, it wasn't even thinly veiled.
He called them hustlers.
Hustlers.
Rudy Giuliani compared the votes that they allegedly were hiding to drugs.
Yeah, and let's be clear, these are people, and you heard the beginning of her testimony, who are doing this because they believe that it is a calling, it is public service to help out on Election Day, to help out with the pillar of democracy, especially for African Americans, especially for African American women who didn't have that opportunity for so long. And this country should be throwing a parade for election workers, not have the President of the United States start, to use your term, a reign of terror against them.
There were a couple of things. I confess I started crying listening to her. To be scared to say your own name in public. Can you imagine? And Ruby Freeman's last words, "There is nowhere I feel safe, nowhere. Do you know what it's like to have the President of the United States target you?" It was racist, it was chilling, and I just want to say thank you to all election workers. Thank you to these state officials who were Republicans, who stood up, who were threatened, whose families were threatened. They've been nothing short of extraordinary through this.
The mainstreaming of threats and violence will be a giant legacy of Donald Trump's big lie. It was a mainstream of Donald Trump's presidency. Threats against judges, threats against civil servants in this case, people who don't get paid a lot of money, who are doing the Lord's work of democracy. You meet them when you travel. You ask them, how are the rules different here? How are the rules different there? They're great to us. They don't get paid a lot of money. They don't get a lot of notoriety for what they do, but they are the building blocks of our democracy. They keep it safe. They keep it secure. They keep it credible. In this case, they did. In this election, as Trump's own people said, it was perhaps more secure than any election in the past because they were on overdrive because of the pandemic. They knew they were going to have issues, and so they were ready. But the mainstreaming of threats and violence, naming people publicly, the President of the United States, knowing, there's just no way to not know the impact. Donald Trump names somebody. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen. And again, the fact that there are not more people in his party standing up to this, saying we are making a clean break from this, it will not stand, as opposed to continuing to call him their leader, is ridiculous.
It's not just that. It's that you have here in Shaye Moss and Lady Ruby two women who are literally protecting democracy. They're the guardians of democracy. And it is not just that House Republicans and Senate Republicans, with a few notable exceptions, Kinzinger and Cheney and a few others, it's not just that they're not equal to them. They're actually on the other side. These women are protecting democracy, and most House Republicans, either through complicity or silence or active participation, are actually trying to undermine democracy. It is shocking.
And on that note, the fact that Shaye said that she left her job, she's no longer an election worker, and they put up pictures of all of the people who worked there, and she said none of them is an election worker anymore. So that speaks to what happened, but also what is going to potentially happen going forward. There are big elections in Georgia this November for the Senate, for the governor's mansion, and then down ballot. And if you don't have people like Shaye doing those jobs, who is going to do those jobs?
I do think that that is part of the intention here on the part of some of the people who carried this out. They want to run the good guys out of town.
Totally.
So they can replace them with people who are pushing lies, who are pushing conspiracy theories, pushing this idea that if they just don't feel that it's right, it just doesn't feel right to them, that they can disregard the facts and do whatever they want in American elections. That's the dangerous part of all of this. And for this to happen, I mean, look, this happened all over the country, but the reason that I think Shaye Moss's testimony was so powerful, in the state of Georgia, as Dana mentioned earlier, they know what it's like to not have the right to vote. And the right to vote in that state for Black people in particular was fought for, and it was won, and it was fought for by people who were willing to participate in the process. She decided to participate in the process because her grandmother, who was old enough to remember when you couldn't vote in Georgia, told her that she should participate. Those elderly people that she helped get their absentee ballots, those people are old enough to remember when they couldn't vote. So the point here is to run people like her and her mother out of town, out of this business, out of our elections, and to corrupt the entire institution from the ground up.
Truly an upsetting day of testimony. Anderson?
Jake, thanks very much. In fact, I want to play some of what Shaye Moss said about the impact this has had on her life. Let's listen.
I don't want anyone knowing my name. I don't want to go anywhere with my mom because she might yell my name out over the grocery aisle or something. I don't go to the grocery store at all. I haven't been anywhere at all. I've gained about 60 pounds. I just don't do nothing anymore. I don't want to go anywhere. I second guess everything that I do. It's affecting my life in a major way, in every way, all because of lies.
Gloria Borger, I mean, to the point that Abby was making, that I mean, this is part of a plan to get the Shaye Mosses, people who have been doing this for a long time, out of the process and get others who are more pliable in.
You know, I kept thinking throughout this hearing, which was so emotional in so many ways, that it's not only democracy that seems to be at stake here, but it's our humanity. I mean, yes, this is an issue about trying to steal an election. Donald Trump powering through every elected official he could. And today we saw both from the officials like Rusty Bowers and then from Ruby and Shay, you see it from the other side and the humanity of what happens when you are unfairly attacked and the mob goes after you and your life is upended all because you were trying to do your job. And at one point, you know, Rusty Bowers, who I thought was just an incredible witness, he clearly is a very religious person, and he teared up at one point, and he said, it is a tenet of my faith that the Constitution is divinely inspired, and I would not do it.
George Conway, you were clearly impacted by Rusty Bowers.
I was impacted by Rusty Bowers. I was impacted by Shay Moss and Lady Ruby. You know, I come here as a lawyer, right? And I want to make a list of all the different ways and all the different approaches that the committee has gone to show, you know, the criminal intent of Donald Trump and his co-conspirators. And, you know, today it was about the humanity. Today, to me, was the have you no decency moment of these hearings. Right? Like in the McCarthy era. It was like, this shows the impact of the lies on individual. You know, it's one thing to talk about, oh, Donald Trump told 30,000 lies in office. It almost becomes an abstraction. These are lies that are affecting, you know, we saw what people died on Capitol Hill because of these lies. These people were just doing the right thing for democracy, and their lives have been upended. You know, and Rusty Bowers, I mean, he was put under just tremendous pressure to do something as a Republican, but he acted as a Christian and as an American citizen. And he put his morality first over his politics, as did these women from Georgia who, you know, they're just ordinary people. And the emotional impact on this, I think, shows why we can't let this go. The people like Bowers and people like Lady Ruby and Shay Moss, these people need to be supported by all of us, and particularly by the people in power who are too terrified to speak out against Donald Trump.
And Chris, I want to play something that Rusty Bowers said, Arizona House Speaker. He was questioned about, well, it's an incident of something Rudy Giuliani said in his presence. Let's play that.
Did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
And what exactly did he say, and how did that come up?
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. And I don't know if that was a gaffe, or maybe he didn't think through what he said, but both myself and others in my group, the three in my group and my council, both remembered that specifically, and afterwards we kind of laughed about it.
Well, you know, you laugh about it, but it's saying the quiet part out loud. That's what the whole effort of Donald Trump and his gang was we have a lot of theories, but we just don't have any evidence or facts to support it. You know, I want to pick up on what George said, that, you know, what struck me today, and I think it was clearly the most emotionally powerful day of the hearing so far, these were people who were just trying to do the right thing. Yeah. You know, in the case of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, two black women who wanted to help make it easier for people to vote, to exercise their right as Americans. In the case of Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, and you know, he had this one line, he said that, you know, the numbers, you know, the numbers were the numbers and the numbers don't lie. He wasn't trying to spin it. He wasn't trying to push it from one side or the other. He was just trying to count the vote. What could be more elemental than that in a democracy? And then, you know, to me, Rusty Bowers was the most powerful person, because what you saw was the simple, plain-spoken devotion to the law and to the devotion to God. And, you know, I'm going to date myself here. As I was watching him, I was thinking of, movie heroes, people like Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, or Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird. Simple, decent, plain-spoken men who had a sense of morality and were just trying to live up to it. And you saw all of these 4 people I've mentioned, and Trump and his